Hey there, this is Anna Callahan. You are listening to Incorruptible Massachusetts. This is where we really talk about state politics, try and engage people. We want to help people understand why it is so broken. We want to let you know how you can get involved, basically. And so we are here. I have my regular Jonathan Cohn, and we have a special guest, Erin Leahy from Act on Mass. So if each of you want to go ahead and introduce yourselves, that would be amazing. Jonathan, do you want to go first as a regular?
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, kind of have been a volunteer. I'm based in Boston. I've been a volunteer with different progressive issue and electoral campaigns since moving up here almost exactly 8 years ago. I'll give a shout out. Regular co-host Jordan Berg Powers isn't here. It was just his birthday, and it is his daughter Ella's birthday today. Shout out, happy birthday to Jordan and Ella.
And
I think Kara's birthday was just recently too.
Amazing. Erin.
Hi everybody, my name is Erin Leahy. I'm the organizing director for Act on Mass, which is a nonprofit started in 2018, basically founded to be kind of a watchdog, kind of shine a light on the issues with transparency, accountability in the Mass State House. So extremely germane to what y'all are doing in this conversation. And really trying to merge the realm of good governance and progressive issues. So that's what we do. And I've been with them since just October. My background's in electoral politics. And now I get to live in the very fun world of the State House. So, thanks for having me, guys.
Oh yeah, thanks for being here. And I am Anna Callahan, she, her, live in Medford. And I do want to mention before we get started that we're gonna have a live broadcast of this podcast on July 24th at the Boston Common at 11 a.m. So we would love to see you all there. Bring your questions. We'll take questions from the audience, and it's going to be super fun. So, but today we are talking about the rules. There was a vote on the rules that was supposed to happen in January and then got delayed, and it just happened. And a lot of people were working on it. No one more than Act on Mass. And so, I really, I'm going to delay the moment you've all been waiting for, which is Erin talking, but I'm going to ask Jonathan a question about what are rules? Why should people care about rules?
So one quote that I'll use to lead into this that I always like invoking is a quote that Don Berwick, who ran for governor in 2014, would often invoke. I forget the guy who actually used this phrase originally, but it was that every system is perfectly designed to predict for the results that it gets. And it's a great way of thinking of the rules for any chamber, since for any chamber or any organization is that you set out rules, and if you're getting, let's say, less than ideal outcomes, that at least in part will stem from how you're designing how things operate. That there will be with anything that there can be kind of cultural things that exist apart from that, but if you're baking in a set of rules and things are constantly not turning out the way you want, they're at least going to be part of the issue. And that's something that typically happens in January. And Erin, in a second, we'll ask about why that didn't happen and like why they've existed without having to pass new rules for a long time. But to govern things like what happens in a committee, what happens on the House floor, what can't happen in either of those. How a vote happens, what committees even exist, all of that stuff has to be created somehow, because it doesn't kind of just simply exist. And for any of that to exist, for any of those kind of processes and procedures about how representatives, or in the Senate case, and senators act and how they act together, has to be set out. And so it's something that how those are laid out, they can reinforce the centralization of the chamber, or they can like kind of chip away at the centralization of the chamber, depending on how they're written. But that's just kind of a little bit of teeing things up. But we'd love to kind of pass over to Erin. So why are they doing this in July? When they've been in session since January.
To torture me personally. I don't know if that was explicitly Speaker Mariano's reasoning, but feels like it. So I mean, the reason on paper, he sent out, the booze.
specifically ask for some sound effects.
Yes, I'm gonna need some yays later to like pick me up. So just like have your finger hovering over that.
You got it.
So Speaker Mariano in late January sent out this big letter where he announced that he was moving the rules vote to July, when normally we expect it to be late January, early February. He gave a couple of reasons, one of which was just COVID. They wanted to keep the emergency rules in place that they put in place because of COVID, and COVID wasn't done yet, so And then he also talked about the need to study the rules and have a rules review with a report due in early July. He also cited, without name, Act on Mass and our coalition of progressive organizations who had been, up until that point and continue to do so after then, lobbying basically for a number of changes to the rules. And did he say outright that movement and that pressure was the reason for the move? Not necessarily, but it was a pretty big part of it. I think there was a lot of focus. We really had built a lot of momentum behind our rules changes and our amendments, and they didn't want to take that vote in the midst of all of that. So they punted it, partially using the emergency rules as an excuse. And then finally took up the House rules last week in July.
So before we go on, I apologize. Before we go on, my mouse just fell on the floor. Erin, what were the rules that you guys were pushing for?
So there are 3 rules. The first campaign was a little bit different, but basically we wanted all committee votes to be made public because, fun fact, they're not. They're just not, which is wild. Mass is in the minority of states that don't make all of their committee votes public. And in fact, even the state Senate does and has since 2018. So it really is a bizarre fixture of the Massachusetts House of Representatives that they don't. And we wanted to argue to have bills be available to the public and to reps 72 hours before they have to vote on them. This is a really big issue where bills come out in 24 hours or less than 24 hours, popping out of committees where they've been hiding behind closed doors for months, 6 months, 9 months. And then suddenly they come out of,
in that time.
Yes, exactly. And suddenly they come out of committee with massive changes, usually always bad changes. Rarely do they come out with being stronger, more progressive bills than they went in. And then they get rammed through with near unanimous votes in less than 24 hours. And those of us in the advocacy community and just like concerned citizens who are the stakeholders of this type of legislation don't have any time. What are they going to do? Drop their day jobs to go rally and lobby their reps and email their reps and read, 100 pages of legislation. So that was the second rule, having more time to review bills so the public has more input. And then the third one for the first campaign was a little bit different. It was lowering the roll call threshold to make it easier to get votes on the record. We changed our tactic for the second campaign and made it more about the concentration of power in the state house, which we really felt was missing from the first part of our campaign, the first part of the conversation. So that's why we started advocating for reinstating term limits for the Speaker of the House. Just an 8-year term limit, something that we had until 2015, when then Speaker Robert DeLeo saw his time as Speaker coming to an end and then insisted that those term limits be removed. So all of these things have a lot of precedent either in the Mass House or in other similar state legislatures or even just the Senate.
What's wild as well as even thinking of with like speakers of the House is how we're just like so not even used to having a just normal boring transfer of power with speakers of the House because of how often that they like like how it was a rarity that DeLeo didn't end up like in a lawsuit against him and that being like the reason for him leaving.
Yeah, not just lawsuit, but
like our ending up in prison.
Indictment. Yeah.
That's kind of wild about that, and that's even like having it set that like you say this time, it's not something that you're going to be building up power forever. Almost just gives a degree of regularity to it.
Right. It's a powerful position. I mean, the Speaker gets to decide the committee assignments for every single member. So
Mhm.
there are some committees that come with a lot of power, some that come with basically none and basically see no
Mhm.
bill. So he gets to decide that. And I say he because it's always been a white man in
Mhm.
Massachusetts holding the speakership. He gets to decide if people get stipends along with their chair positions or leadership positions. So he really gets to set the salary. And it's funny that I'm saying this in front of Anna Callahan because I know this because I said it at the doors, knocking doors for her. So it's like, I feel very ironic in this moment, very grateful. And he also gets to control staffing, which is something that I've been told again and again, we haven't been talking about enough at Act on Mass.
Mhm.
Staffing is a huge carrot and stick for rank and file members of the legislature, because if you have one staffer, you can simply not be as good of a rep
Mhm.
to your constituents. And if you play nice, the speaker will reward you with more staff, and you can literally do your job better and easier and endear yourself more to your constituents. So it's the cyclical, really broken system.
It is wild when you realize how so many of them do just have one staffer. Like they can be there for years and they have one staffer who has to handle like all of the constituent requests.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like that list is powerful, but like there's a list of like, I talked to a stepping down state rep and they went on about like 25 things that the speaker controls about your life when you're state rep, including your parking spot and where you sit in the chamber. You can't sit in the chamber close to the people that you normally work with because God forbid you be able to like lean over and say, hey, like, let's do this. It controls things like whether
Like a
you get
teacher
to use
setting
the
a
common
costume.
rooms for a meeting. I mean, it's like crazy. Jonathan?
No, it's just that your comment just reminds me of like the teacher like breaking apart kids that the teacher doesn't want to sit next to each other in class.
The troublemakers. I mean, we need more troublemakers.
Yeah, and so I guess let's put a little button on that. Yes, the speaker has a ton of power, and no one should have that much power. We're not even saying with our rules changes to necessarily remove any of those privileges, which, I think we do support removing some of those powers for sure, but that wasn't even what we went for. And a spoiler alert, that amendment lost terribly. That modest check on what can otherwise be somewhat unfettered power. Even that was a third rail.
Yeah. All three of them lost.
Yep.
And that is not a reflection on Act on Mass. That is a reflection, as everyone who's listening to this podcast knows, that is a reflection on the insane culture of groupthink at the State House, where everyone does what they think the speaker wants without even being told. Yeah. So I actually would love, I've heard some of these from you before, and I would love to hear, Act on Mass has been lobbying for, I don't know, 9 months? 9 months. So
pregnancy term. This like sad, shitty baby during the House rules.
You have heard all of the excuses that all these reps give. And we would love to hear them. And we'd love to hear like, what are the excuse? What's the excuse? And why is that excuse baloney?
Sure. So this is probably my favorite thing to talk about. I find it very fun and funny and interesting to hear the kind of mental gymnastics reps will do and rhetorical gymnastics. We at Act on Mass, we call it legisplating or legislator explaining. And once you learn to identify it, you'll see it everywhere. And they really, really lose their power once you can kind of know what the reps are doing.
And by the way, this is what people love about politicians.
Right.
Is when they're spinning you a bunch of bullshit.
Yeah. Given like with the Olympics coming up soon, it would just be fun. Like, because I'm gonna say like, basically it's like, oh, are you trying out for the Olympics? Because the gymnastics in that statement were really impressive.
Olympics. I love legislating Olympics. I love it.
Yeah, so I know they do like a bunch of people, like a bunch of like politicians in suits getting up on like a mat next to like one of those like horses and rings and just being like, committee votes don't necessarily reflect someone's position on a bill, and then just the audience claps.
Did they say that?
Like 10 out of 10. Yeah. So that's one of the ones I heard on. Yes, exactly. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So public committee votes, right, should be so uncontroversial. It is the letter of the law in so many state legislatures and even in the Senate. But what we've heard some reps say really comes down to not assuming that members of the public are going to misunderstand what these votes mean. We heard this, one of the reps during the joint rules held up a postcard that one of her constituents had sent her, very earnestly saying, "Dear rep, I want you to support making committee votes public so I can know who votes for and against these bills." And she stood up there and she said, "This person doesn't understand the legislative process. It's not a vote for a bill, it's a vote to advance a bill."
Can you imagine being that person? Can you imagine being that voter and being
that
told
constituent who
that you are stupid? What an I mean, I'm getting hot and bothered. I'm
Yeah.
personally offended by a legislator doing that to one of their own constituents.
Yeah.
It's also an interesting thing that if you're saying that the people of your constituents don't understand the process, then like, why aren't you doing more to do civic education in your district?
Yes.
But like, it's also just a kind of a weird concept that I remember seeing a few reps on the floor trying to argue that voting yes to give a favorable report to a bill is not the same thing as voting for a bill, which is something that requires a certain type of absurd like logic for anybody to believe. That just saying that like you're like, yes, this bill should go ahead and go on to the next committee and get to the floor, but I don't actually support it.
Right. You're literally moving it through the process. Yeah. And crickets. Yeah, I think your point is right on. If these reps are so concerned about constituents' lack of civic education or understanding what the committee process really looks like and what it means and how things change, bills get rewritten as they move through committee, yeah, that's absolutely all completely true. Then why is your answer as a rep and the person in power to then just shut people out more, make it harder to understand how this legislative process works, as opposed to putting the votes out there? And if people say, I don't understand why you voted this way or why you voted that way, saying, okay, let me explain it to you. Like, this was my thinking behind that. But the truth is, reps don't want to do that. Reps really don't want to explain themselves to their constituents. They'd rather not.
One of my favorite excuses from rep, and this was 2 years ago when this issue came up, was one state rep who honestly said to somebody about his reasoning for not supporting making committee votes public is, but then my constituents would call me more.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid.
I think we need to take that privilege away from Anna. You are abusing it.
And it was kind of a wild thing as well when you were seeing some of the state reps argue on the floor. And I believe this was like Representative Kate Hogan who was saying this of, oh well, like it's kind of acting as though these are like totally uninformed positions that like, well, it's after we take votes and then people might talk with experts and different advocates and other people make decisions. Like, you had a hearing on this bill, that they're only taking these votes after they have a hearing, and sometimes these hearings can go on forever, of different people testifying for or against. So unless you as a rep chose to not attend the hearing and not read any of the testimony submitted and not do any research, like, you should have an informed position on what you're voting on.
Yeah, what are some of the other ones? What are some good ones?
Okay, for 72 hours, which I will just put a little asterisk, we didn't actually technically get a vote on 72 hours to read a bill during the House rules. There was a similar amendment filed for 48 hours, but otherwise mostly the same. And they took that one up first. That one got voted down. And so they ruled the 72-hour one out of order. But generally, for more time to read a bill, oh, Jonathan, I mean, you wrote so much of this in your piece. People gave excuses about bills that they left until the last day of the 2-year-long legislative session to take up and vote on, saying if we had had to wait another day to vote on this, it wouldn't have happened. Never mind, they could have voted on it or taken it up 2 days earlier. but they choose not to do that.
No, it's kind of wild. It's like you could just, let's say, like release bills on Friday and then like have a weekend and then vote on that Wednesday when you're in session. And it's not because like I think we talked about in one kind of episode before about how so much of what the legislature does is push off everything to the last day or last 2 days of the session. And wouldn't it be nice if they like just push that up deadline a bit? They'll still have a time crunch where they push everything up like off to like the whatever penultimate day of the set, like the whatever number penultimate day of the session. But at least that gives some time for people to know what they're doing.
This is what I chalk up to another piece of lack of leadership. We have a group of people that is called leadership, and I wish we could agree on a different name for these people, because they don't lead. They don't have a vision for what policies we should be having. They don't have a vision for what the lives of people in Massachusetts should be like. They don't have a vision for like, how can we get bills passed in a way that allows people to read them, or that, works on, climate in March and healthcare in July and all these things. Everything gets smashed up to the last second. And then people are frantically like throwing in amendments to the budget because nothing got voted on. Total lack of leadership.
Like, but I just love what you're saying with Erin, is that people are saying, well, if you moved up the deadline, then I wouldn't be able to work until the very last minute on the deadline that exists. Makes you think. It's like,
yeah. I mean, it's just silly.
And so that's a problem.
It's like, I think there was actually a great editorial from the editorial board of the Boston Globe that came out on Sunday. I'll just give them, a shout out to the Globe. Not that they need my shout out, but they've been really great on this issue and following this very niche beat, if you will. And the author said something like, it's almost like they're using their own lack of time management skills as a reason not to implement these reforms that would make it better. And that's exactly what they're doing. Never mind that, I'll just also take a step back. This language of the amendment has an emergency waiver. If 2/3 of the state legislature wants to waive that requirement for 72 or whatever, 48 hours, then they don't even have to wait that long. And that is a supermajority, which is already what the Dems need to pass any controversial adjacent legislation so that it overrides a Baker veto. So the Roe Act, the roadmap bill, those are such pieces of legislation that already needed a supermajority. So if you have that to beat, a Baker veto, then you have that to waive the 72 hours if you really wanted to.
Yeah. And by the way, I think we didn't mention, I think you mentioned it before we started recording, about how the rules vote itself had only 3.5 hours?
Yes. Yeah. And, like very on the nose, as always. Yeah. They announced that the rules were even going to be voted on with less than 24 hours notice. It was in an informal session, AKA 2 members of leadership in the House chambers, just kind of doing stuff. Not a full formal session, not a full quorum. And they just got up there and said, hey, tomorrow we're voting on the rules. Knock, knock, it's done. And the deadline to file amendments was 3.5 hours from then. Oh yeah, and the rules package was 115 pages long. So for me, I'm an advocate. I'm a full-time advocate. Even I was scrambling, doing a Adobe side-by-side comparison on the phone with the reps who were filing, scrolling through, trying to see what the changes were, going to our relevant sections to see if they were changed, rewriting the amendments because you have to include things like line numbers and after this word and after that word. So technically things had to change. And doing that in 3.5 hours was brutal. Never mind people for whom this is not their full-time employment. Totally cuts out the voices of everyday people.
Yeah.
Exactly, because like for many people, by the time that they're even learning that something is being voted on, it will have already been voted on.
Yeah.
Also, and even that type of rush also leads to just errors. Because didn't you had say, I think when we were talking before then, they actually they made something less transparent than their own rules, their own report on the rules said. And it was apparently actually not intentional, but because they rushed this, they didn't actually have enough, and you didn't have enough eyes on it, you then make mistakes that you need to correct on them, that they need to correct. They need to actually rush to correct.
Right. And leadership is afforded that luxury with technical amendments, but I can't file a technical amendment to correct something. They'd have to do it on my behalf. So just another way they have a lot of power.
Yeah. Okay, one more. I know you've talked about the Republican excuse. I would love to hear that one before we talk about next steps.
Oh, sure. So this is kind of how you know the reps are running low on reasons they didn't vote for these amendments. Because I've heard a lot of reps just saying, guys, look at the vote tally. All the Republicans voted for this and not that many Democrats. So ergo, deductive reasoning, or inductive, I suppose, it must be a Republican issue. This must be something that conservatives like. This must be bad for Democrats. I can't support it because so many Republicans supported it. And I'm just going to tee that up for Jonathan because I think he can respond probably better than I can.
No, it's just funny, as we were chatting before, is like they love getting Republicans to sign on to their stuff all the time.
Bipartisan.
Yeah.
They, like, it's something I remember having joked. This is on the Senate side rather than the House, but I remember having joked last year. It was theoretically possible that after last year's election, that the Senate would end up as 39 Democrats and Bruce Tarr. That if every Democrat on the ballot had won in a state Senate race, and like they still would have wanted Bruce Tarr's support for stuff. And it's the same kind of dynamic in the House where you often see that how they actively want, especially with anything with a hint of controversy in a bill, they actively want Republicans signing on to their bills. So it becomes ironic for them to say that something that actually did have enough, like suddenly that's bad to them that Republicans are supporting something, although they love it when it's their own legislation.
Yeah, I think this also is just indicative of how much, like, you don't have to be a Democrat or right or left. Everybody hates corruption. Everybody hates the fact that there is a small, tiny group of, whatever you want to call it, elites or like people in power who make all the decisions. Like that is not how our democracy should work. And you don't have to be a Democrat to think that.
Yeah. And it's also, and it speaks as well to what we were saying before in terms of the incentive structure in the building, that the reason that you'll have some of the most progressive Democrats voting with Republicans is they have the least felt loyalty to the Speaker of the House. All that says for others is not that, oh, this is a bad thing because Republicans backed it. It's like, no, it's that a Republican caucus won't feel, oh, but what will the Democratic Speaker of the House do to me?
Exactly. This is not a left-right issue. It's a top-bottom issue. It's an issue of power.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's next? Rules were voted down. What's the plan?
Whew. So we're just gonna keep fighting. It might not be in the same format as this campaign has been because it has been really exhausting to run a statewide grassroots lobbying campaign for 9 months. So we have a little bit of time to regroup and strategize for the long term, but there's going to be another rules vote in 2023. I mean, there's going to be an election cycle in 2022. We're trying to do everything we can to spread as much public awareness about this issue, turn it into an electoral issue, right? I mean, that was already something of an electoral issue in 2020, but frankly, if, people deserve to know how their reps are voting in the legislature, and they also deserve to know if they represent their values on the issue of good governance. So that's going to be our mission, to go out there and spread that. In what form that takes, we'll see. Everyone sign up for email updates, actonmass.org.
Well, I tell you, we need more and more people, groups, everybody spreading the word about how broken the state house is. Exactly. We need more of that. And that's what we're here for. I remember, Jonathan, you had one comment about about a tactic we can use with our reps.
Oh, so one thing that people should do, and I'd say like props, because like Acton Mass did a good job of bothering people last session about like with committees of votes, ask your rep how they voted. One thing that I was coming to before is that if we now know, if the House is like half measure of posting tallies and posting who voted no, and so you see how many voted yes, but you don't see who they are, and you see how many people didn't show up to vote, but not who they are, you can just assume that your rep isn't showing up to vote if they're not telling you how they're voting, and just call them out for that until they agree to actually start telling you how they're voting. As well as follow up, because I know I've seen that a number of reps are like, oh, well, I didn't vote for this for like mumble reasons. But I'll tell people my vote if they ever ask. I'm like, okay, to do it.
Yes,
Totally.
yes, especially now that, no votes are going to be posted online. That might change the game a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Because now we're going to be able to see if your rep is either in that column of no's or not listed in that committee. So ask your rep what they did, and then, I don't know, post that online somewhere. If they won't do it, maybe we'll do it ourselves. Guerrilla transparency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If they start feeling like that they don't like responding to constituents about something they could offload to do for somebody else to post for them, maybe
That's
they'll
right.
realize
Oh, yeah.
they should just do it.
Oh, that's another excuse I heard. I'm so sorry to go long, but the excuse that this would be burdensome on staff to post committee votes online could not be more specious. Literally, in the Senate, the way they record their committee votes is through a software called Laws. And they'll say it's annoying in the joint committees because that means they don't use their normal software. They have to do things like old fashioned. They have to do things outside of that software just so it doesn't go online. So I don't want to hear it.
Nice. So it's in fact burdensome on staff to not have the votes going.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
And we've heard, staff have been great allies to this cause. So yeah, I don't want to hear none of that.
Right on. Well, we could talk forever about this. It's really, hang on. It's great work. Act on Mass. This is Erin, the moment you've been waiting for.
Yay! Are those children's voices? You have a big kid following for this podcast. Oh my god. Incorruptible.
So incredible work. Looking forward to see what you do next. And thanks everybody. We'll be here a week from now, and on the 24th we'll be on the Common.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
See y'all later.